Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as The Lost. That's kinda ironic because this episode also got kinda lost, at least not in the sense that I didn't upload it when I usually do. And what I end up doing is I play the daily, I record it, I upload it, and then schedule it to release it the next day when the daily rolls over. And I would have done that if it wasn't for the fact that I did my Lua familiar tutorial video. And it just was such a difficult video for me to make because I felt every time I recorded that something wasn't right. And of course, the more time you record, because it's quite cold here, my voice got kind of coarse and my throat didn't really hurt. But it was more in the sense that I just couldn't enunciate some things properly. I just felt like my vocal range wasn't there. So for that reason, I decided maybe it's not the best idea to record another video that day. Even though these videos are relatively short, I don't really spend that much time on them. That doesn't mean that there's no effort put into them, but you know, compared to a tutorial video, these are much easier to produce and make, and that's why they're kind of my daily thing. But when I actually decided that I wouldn't record it, then I decided that I have to do it the next morning, and that's what I'm doing. But of course, because of that, that means that the upload is kind of late. So that sometimes happens. I just really can't have control over it, you know. I do try to make a daily upload, so for that reason I think you could always expect a daily video, but just don't be too surprised if sometimes, I'm not saying it's gonna happen often or that it happens often, but sometimes the video will have a little bit of a delay. So with that said, we are playing as The Lost, and The Lost is one of those characters that I think either goes in this direction that you get really strong really early on, or that you end up really weak with no items. And I think that problem is kind of enunciated on The Lost, especially because you kind of have to get really strong if you want to get it to the womb and then boss rush and then of course hush. What's a good strategy in these daily runs in general is that you want to get a respawn item, so you don't really play as The Lost. Playing as a character that can only take 2 hits per room is okay in some situations, because after all you do have the Holy Mantle, and the Holy Mantle does allow you to do some quite crazy things in some situations and really kind of break the game in some ways. But in this case, what you want to do is just get more health, so you can do the objectives like boss rush and hush, and they're usually the biggest culprits in ending lost streaks. So playing through the normal rooms is not that big of a deal, but when you have to face an enemy or a room which just takes like 5-7 minutes, there's a very good chance that you're gonna end up getting hit more than just 2 times and you're gonna end up dying. So as The Lost, you don't really want to tackle those objectives, or if you're forced to, you really have to think, is your run strong enough, or maybe you need to have a teleport card like a failsafe so you can teleport out if you do take damage. To actually consider doing those things. And usually if you can't really transform into any other characters via the respawn items, it's a good idea to skip all those things all together if you're not really comfortable. But then again, you have to remember that someone out there would have found a way to beat boss rush, and then it will just have a naturally higher score. So in that sense, I think Lost is one of those characters that is a bit more skill based than any other, and I think obviously that's his purpose. He's meant to be a challenging character that people play when they want to kind of play the hard version of the game, at least in the sense that you're playing as a character that doesn't have a lot of HP. But thankfully what happened in this particular run is that we found Dark Judas and we found the Lost Vessel, which kind of emulates us having the Lost, because we get both flight and even better we get increased damage and we get the ability to have hearts. In this case we just have spirit hearts, but obviously that's no big problem. Having spirit hearts or red hearts is actually, having spirit hearts is preferable, so we're in a much better position than we were before. And what's even better is that we keep the Holy Mantle from The Lost, which is one of those things that is kind of a bonus whenever you're playing as The Lost when you respawn. So for that reason, it's usually also a good idea to actually keep the D4. And then when you have a lot of battery charges, I'm saying a lot, like I haven't ever done the math on that, but I think if you have like 20 items and like 5 battery charges, they're just a ballpark. If you start rerolling, there's a good chance that one of those rerolled items would give you a respawn item, which means then you can kill yourself, you can come back, and if your run is still weak, you can then use the D4 to actually get even stronger. Because of course, eventually with the D4 or the D100, as you keep rolling, one of those runs is just gonna be game-breakingly strong, and you're gonna be able to beat the game, no problem. Here I decided not to kind of risk it and keep rerolling with the D4 because I thought we had a good combination going. We had the Jar of Flies, which is an item that I personally really like. I really think especially when you have the stopping power that we do with Dr. Fetus, that you can just amass it, unleash it on the boss, and then the boss ends up dying very fast. The fact that we have Dark Judas also means that our flies deal a lot of damage, along with some other damage ups like Pentagram, but that's not really that consequential. But in this case, what ends up happening is that we are forced in this situation where where we have to choose, are we going to play with Dr. Fetus or not? And a lot of people don't really like Dr. Fetus. Thankfully, it was buffed in Afterbirth. In Rebirth, it was one of the most terrible items, and in the base game, I think it was one of the best items, so that was kind of ironic. It did go through some changes, but now I think it's in a very good spot where it allows you to kind of kill bosses quite fast, but more importantly, it does allow you to have infinite bombs. If you know how to play and kind of play around with them, I think the item is actually very good, and that's the reason why I also picked it up on the Lost. But the Lost actually has another bonus to go with Dr. Fetus, so if you didn't pick it up on this day, I think you're missing out, because what usually ends up killing you with Dr. Fetus is either the rooms, which have a lot of enemies which split and kind of corner you, and you don't really have the capabilities of dodging it and dodging your bombs at the same time, or the rooms where you kind of have to finagle your bombs through the rocks and you really can't get a good aim on the enemies. But thankfully, because the Lost has spectral tiers, the bombs are also spectral, which means that they travel through rocks, and that's one of the many benefits of having a good synergies in the game, is that you can, if you know what your character is good at, you can actually take these things in these situations to actually abuse them, not abuse them, but I would say that makes them better, because Dr. Fetus on its own is, I would say, quite a dangerous item, but with spectral tiers there's really no problem or any worry of the bombs ricocheting back at you when you kind of aim it badly and hit it at the rock, and that's usually what happens, or at least that's how I usually get with the Dr. Fetus. Of course, we lose that spectral ability as soon as we transform into Dark Judas, but what I think is important to kind of keep both the Fetus items, the Epic Fetus and the Dr. Fetus afloat, is just the ability to fly, because that's where you just have a lot more maneuverability and you can just dodge enemies better, and the fact that the chasms and spikes and the poops and things like that don't really come in your way is one of those things that I think makes, or maybe I would say boosts this item's power in the good direction. So now that we've arrived, and we even got Brimstone, which is kind of ridiculous. I thought it was synergized a bit differently, because with Epic Fetus what happens is when the rocket falls down, the Brimstone shots go out of the bombs, and I thought something like that would happen with Dr. Fetus, but sadly it doesn't. What happens is that the Dr. Fetus, or the Brimstone, just gets added on top of the Dr. Fetus, and of course using Brimstone whenever you're shooting bombs is kind of a tough thing to do, because that means you have to charge, and while you're charging you're still shooting bombs, and you have to dodge bombs, and if you shoot two of them in the same direction, the second one explodes first and then ricochets the first bomb back at you and you take damage, and it's not a nice sight to see, and for that reason I'm not really relying on Brimstone here to deal damage for me. But what I was trying to say before is that we're actually quite comfortable in this position. Sadly, there's no hush fight on this floor, I mean just in general, because this is a run that only goes to Mom's Heart, and any run that does go to Mom's Heart doesn't have a hush fight, and that's just that. So for that reason, I'm kind of disappointed that we can't fight Hush, because I think this is one of those rounds that's actually really good at fighting Hush. Not only do we have some orbitals to protect us from damage, but we also have a nice way of dealing AoE damage to enemies. Thankfully, the run isn't over yet, because we have a sacrifice room. And might be saying, a sacrifice room, is that really worth it? Transporting to the Dark Room from the Mom's Heart floor, or Womb 2 or Utero 2. To get more points, and of course it is. Usually I don't think there's a case where taking the sacrifice room isn't worth it. The only way it might not be worth it is if we had an AWAS rune, which would allow us to go to Shoal, and then we had a chance to go to the sacrifice room there. But obviously we never are guaranteed to get the sacrifice room on any particular floor, which means that we kind of have to take it as soon as we see it, and that's a strategy that you can imply even in Mom's runs, the runs that only go to Mom's Foot. And because the Mom's Foot is, because that floor is only the 6th floor in the game, going further actually nets you a lot more points. So if you have to choose between Boss Rush and going to take the Sacrifice Room, it's better to take the Sacrifice Room, because it's gonna give you more points. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive, because why the hell would it work like that? Because killing yourself on the Sacrifice Room just isn't that big of a deal, but obviously doing Boss Rush is a huge achievement. And of course, I can't argue for the balance of the game, and I think it's kind of broken in that case. But in these later cases, I think that you just have to realize that going to the sacrifice room and teleporting to the dark room is just a huge net gain, that you should always do it when you have the chance. And of course, in this case, we just had the Mitre, which means we had a ton of Spirit Hearts, we had the way to stay invincible, we had the Sack of Sacks, which gave us a lot of battery charges, we can kind of replenish our health to be invincible for the room, and really there was no reason for us not to go to the dark room in this case, because our run was strong, we never felt weak, and we even had a good basis for exploration via the way of us getting invincible with the game kit and the battery charges. So it turned out really well. You know, this daily was one of those lost dailies that turns out really strong, and I wouldn't say it was like super powerful. There was still definitely a lot of like dodging and skill involved, but at the same time it wasn't that hard, you know, like it wasn't no treasure rooms, no shops hard. And I think those runs do kind of refresh the game a bit, and I hope that today's daily, when I play it after I'm recording or now recording this video, is gonna be a bit more challenging, because I really feel like invigorated and I want to play a slow daily just to kind of improve on my dodging a little bit. My damage penalty was quite high, but of course you have to remember that we intentionally took damage 13 times on the sacrifice from spikes, and that is 13 full hearts of damage or 26 hits of damage. But other than that, our score is actually quite solid. We got a lot of swag bonus. Not, we didn't really break the game, but we just did have 99 of every consumable. We did beat both boss rush and the lamp, and our exploration bonus was also quite high because we found every secret room and second secret room thanks to having Dr. Fetus. So all in all, we were ranked 23rd, which I think was like 5th on Gridbot leaderboards, which is again really good. Like top 10 is something that I'm kind of striving for when I'm playing these dailies, but sadly what ends up happening is that I'm so close to the top 3, it's kind of frustrating. But then again, that's more of a first world problem, you know, I'm 5th, I'm not even top 3. But you know, I think that we're going in the right direction with these dailies, and I hope that I'm giving you some good tips as we go along. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.